My name is Elaine, and I'm 62 years old. I have lived a life filled with quiet sacrifices, little victories, and the kind of love only a mother can carry for her child. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment when my son, Matthew, looked me dead in the eye and sneered the words that shattered my heart into pieces. "You'll get nothing from me." Those 6 words have echoed in my head every day since. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the venom in his voice, the way his lip curled with contempt, the coldness in his eyes that didn't look like the boy I had raised. In that moment, I saw not my son, but a stranger. I sat there in silence, stunned, unable to process what had just happened. My hands trembled in my lap, my mouth went dry. I had faced hardships before I'd lost my husband young, worked 2 jobs to keep our little family afloat, and sacrificed every dream I had so Matthew could chase his. But never, in all those years of struggle, had I felt as gutted as I did hearing my own child dismiss me like I was nothing. I wanted to shout back. I wanted to remind him of the nights I stayed awake sewing holes in his school clothes so he wouldn't be embarrassed in class. I wanted to remind him of the times I skipped meals so he could have seconds, of the weekends I spent scrubbing houses just to pay for his textbooks. I wanted to remind him that without me, he wouldn't even have the life he was so arrogantly bragging about. But no words came. My throat was too tight, my chest too heavy. Instead, I just sat there, staring at him, wondering where I had gone wrong. When he finally stormed out, slamming the door behind him, the silence that followed was deafening. I sat in the living room for hours, my mind replaying his words over and over like a cruel melody stuck on repeat. "You'll get nothing from me." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Milo, my little terrier, curled at my feet, offering silent comfort. My mind kept drifting back to Matthew as a child. His soft curls, the way he used to run into my arms after school, the way he once whispered, "I love you, Mom," when he thought I was asleep. How did that sweet boy turn into this man who looked at me with such disdain? The more I thought about it, the more something inside me shifted. For years, I had tolerated his dismissiveness, his selfishness, his entitlement. I had told myself it was just a phase, that he would grow out of it, that if I kept loving him hard enough, he would change. But hearing those words, spoken with such cruelty, ripped away every excuse I had ever made for him. I realized something important that night. Love doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. Love doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity to someone who doesn't value you. And motherhood doesn't mean you have to let your child treat you like garbage. As painful as it was to admit, Matthew had become someone I could no longer trust with my heart or my legacy. I walked over to the small drawer where I kept my documents, birth certificates, insurance papers, my old will. I pulled the folder out and placed it on the table. My hands hovered over it for a long moment. For years, I had assumed Matthew would inherit everything I had worked for. The house, the savings, the little treasures I had collected over a lifetime. It seemed natural he was my only child. But now? Now I saw things differently. Why should someone who disrespected me so profoundly, someone who sneered at my love and sacrifices, benefit from my life's work? The thought was terrifying. Rewriting a will isn't something you take lightly. But the more I sat there, staring at that folder, the more resolute I became. If Matthew truly believed I meant nothing to him, then perhaps it was time I showed him what that felt like. That night, I began to think about my will in a way I never had before. I wasn't just a mother to Matthew, I was everything for him. When I think back over my life, the memories blur together long days, tired nights, and a constant, steady rhythm of giving, giving, giving. I was 28 when I lost my husband to a sudden heart attack. One moment, we were planning Matthew's 5th birthday party, and the next, I was standing in a hospital hallway, holding my son's small hand as he asked me why Daddy wasn't waking up. That was the day I promised myself I would never let Matthew feel alone. If I had to work myself to the bone to make sure he had a good life, then that's exactly what I would do. And that's what I did. I picked up 2 jobs immediately: housekeeping during the day, cashier at a small grocery store in the evenings. Some nights, I barely had the energy to eat dinner. But no matter how exhausted I was, I always made sure Matthew had what he needed. Clean clothes, a hot meal, a kiss on the forehead before bed. Money was tighter than I can even describe. I learned how to stretch $1 until it begged for mercy. I clipped coupons, cooked casseroles that could last 3 days, and mended Matthew's shoes instead of buying new ones. My friends teased me for never treating myself, but I didn't care. Every penny saved was another textbook, another field trip, another chance for Matthew to have the childhood I wanted for him. I'll never forget his first day of kindergarten. I had stayed up late the night before, ironing his little shirt and packing his lunch with extra care. He looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes and said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll be brave." And he was. As he grew older, my sacrifices grew with him. When Matthew wanted to join soccer, I picked up an extra weekend shift to pay for the cleats and uniform. When he begged for a guitar in high school, I sold some of my jewelry to buy him a second-hand one. Every dream he had, I tried to make possible even if it meant mine had to be buried. College was the hardest. He was accepted into a good university, and while I was bursting with pride, I also felt panic. Tuition was astronomical, but I refused to let him see my fear. I took out loans in my name, worked overtime, and even rented out the spare room in our house to strangers just to make ends meet. I remember one winter night, sitting at the kitchen table with stacks of bills spread out in front of me. My hands shook as I calculated how much money I had left for groceries that week. Matthew came into the room, asking if he could go on a spring break trip with his friends. I forced a smile and said, "Of course, sweetheart." And then I found a way to make it happen, even if it meant I ate peanut butter sandwiches for 2 months straight. Looking back now, I wonder if I made a mistake. Did I shield him too much from reality? Did I make life too easy for him? Too comfortable? Because while I was breaking my back to keep our little world running, Matthew seemed to grow more and more entitled. He expected the newest phone, the latest clothes, the freedom to do whatever he wanted without question. And I gave it all to him, convincing myself that I was just being a good mother. I defended him to everyone, teachers who said he was lazy, relatives who whispered he was spoiled, even friends who gently told me I was giving too much. "He's just finding his way," I'd say. "He'll grow out of it." And there were moments, small, fleeting moments that made it all feel worth it. The way he hugged me after graduation, whispering, "Thanks, Mom," into my ear. The time he surprised me with flowers on Mother's Day. The rare evenings we spent laughing over dinner, when it felt like the bond between us was unbreakable. Those moments are what kept me going. They were the crumbs of affection I clung to, convincing myself that all the sacrifices meant something, that one day Matthew would truly see me. But as he grew into adulthood, the balance shifted even more. He stopped calling unless he needed something: money, advice, favors. He'd breeze into my house, grab leftovers from the fridge, and leave without so much as a thank you. And every time, I told myself it was fine. That's what mothers do. Now, looking back with clearer eyes, I see the truth. I see how I poured every ounce of myself into him, expecting that love to be returned. But the love I gave was unconditional, while the love he gave was transactional. I thought my devotion would be enough to keep us close forever. I thought my sacrifices would build a bridge that nothing could break. But when he sneered those words at me, "You'll get nothing from me," I realized how wrong I had been. But looking back, I see the signs were there all along. The little cracks in his behavior started long before the big fight. When I replay Matthew's words in my mind, his sneer, the coldness in his eyes, I can't help but think, maybe I should have seen this coming. Maybe I should have noticed the signs years ago instead of brushing them off. The truth is, his disrespect didn't appear overnight. It crept in slowly, like a shadow, so faint at first that I convinced myself it wasn't there. But now, when I look back, I can see the pattern clearly. It started small, in high school. At first, it was just the way he'd roll his eyes when I asked him to clean his room or help with the dishes. Typical teenage stuff, I told myself. All kids go through phases, my friends said. And I believed it. But then it grew. When I called him to dinner, he wouldn't answer. When I asked about his day, he'd mumble a word or two and retreat to his room. His guitar became his world. his friends, his universe, and I was just the background noise he tolerated. The first time he borrowed money from me was when he was 16. He wanted to go to a concert, and I didn't have the extra cash. He sulked for days, barely speaking to me, until finally I caved. I pulled the money out of the jar I'd been saving for a new winter coat. He promised he'd pay me back. He never did. That became the pattern. Every time he wanted something, a new phone, new shoes, spending money, he'd ask me with that expectant look in his eyes, as if my sole purpose was to provide. If I hesitated, he'd grow cold, sometimes angry, and more often than not, I gave in, because I told myself it was love. But what I didn't see back then was that I wasn't teaching him love. I was teaching him entitlement. When he went off to college, I thought maybe things would change. I thought distance might make him appreciate me more. Instead, it made things worse. He called me often, but never to ask how I was doing. The calls were always the same. "Mom, I need rent money." "Mom, my car broke down. Can you help?" "Mom, I want to go on this trip with my friends. Can you send me something?" And I always did. Even when it meant I skipped paying a bill or cut back on groceries, I found a way to send him money. I told myself it was temporary, that once he graduated and started working, things would balance out. But after he graduated, the calls didn't stop. I remember one day in particular. I had just gotten home from my cleaning job, my back aching, my hands raw from scrubbing. My phone buzzed, and it was Matthew. He didn't even say hello before launching into his request. "Mom, I need $200, rent's due." I hesitated. I didn't have it that week. I told him I could maybe send half. His response? "Wow. So I can never count on you." The words stung more than I could admit. I had spent years giving him everything, and the one time I couldn't, he acted like I had betrayed him. That was the first time I felt something shift inside me, something fragile snapping, though I didn't realize it then. The disrespect only grew from there. He stopped visiting me on holidays unless I begged. He forgot my birthday 2 years in a row. When I confronted him, he laughed it off. "Come on, Mom. Birthdays aren't that big of a deal." When he did visit, it was usually to raid my fridge or ask for money. He'd leave within an hour, his eyes glued to his phone while I sat across from him, desperate for conversation. I remember one Christmas when I cooked a full dinner, hoping for just one night of warmth and connection. He showed up late, left early, and barely touched the food. As he walked out the door, he muttered, "This was boring," under his breath. I stood in the kitchen after he left, staring at the dishes piled high, wondering if I had done something wrong. Friends noticed too. Lila once pulled me aside after Matthew ignored me at a barbecue. "Elaine," she said gently, "he doesn't treat you right. You deserve better than this." But I brushed her off. "He's just busy, he's young, he'll grow out of it." I see now how wrong I was. Because every act of disrespect, every eye roll, every forgotten birthday, every demand for money was a warning sign. And instead of holding him accountable, I made excuses. Instead of drawing boundaries, I gave more. I thought love meant unconditional giving. But what I didn't realize was that love without respect isn't love at all. Looking back, I think part of me always knew Matthew was slipping away from me. Not physically, he was still in my life, still calling, still showing up when it benefited him, but emotionally. The boy who once ran into my arms after school had been replaced by a man who saw me only as a resource. And I let it happen. But the real breaking point didn't come until later, until that explosive argument when he looked me in the eye and sneered the words that still haunt me. And then came the fight that ripped away all illusions. It started as a simple conversation, but it turned into a storm. The night of the argument is etched into my memory as clearly as if it happened yesterday. It wasn't planned. I didn't wake up that morning expecting to go to war with my only child. But sometimes, the ugliest truths come out in the smallest moments. It was a Tuesday evening. I had just paid a stack of bills, my checking account balance looking dangerously low. My body ached from cleaning houses all week, and I sat at the kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea, trying to figure out how I was going to stretch the little money I had left until the next paycheck. That's when Matthew called. "Hey, Mom," he said casually, like he always did when he wanted something. "Listen, I need you to spot me some cash. Just a few hundred to tide me over until payday." I took a deep breath. "Matthew, I can't keep doing this. I'm struggling myself. I barely have enough to cover my bills." There was silence on the other end for a beat. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. "Come on, Mom. You always figure it out. Don't be dramatic." His words hit me like a slap. I clenched the phone tighter. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm telling you the truth. I don't have it. You're an adult now. You need to start standing on your own 2 feet." That's when his tone changed. His voice grew sharp, defensive. "Wow. So now you're just gonna abandon me? After everything you've done, now you're gonna play the victim and act like I'm the bad guy?" My chest tightened. "Matthew, I've given you everything. My whole life has been about making sure you had what you needed. But I can't keep sacrificing myself. I'm getting older. I need to think about my future too." There was a pause. And then, with a venom I had never heard from him before, he said it. "You'll get nothing from me." The words dripped with contempt, like he was spitting venom. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. My throat closed up. I wanted to believe I had misheard, that maybe he hadn't said it, but the silence that followed confirmed it. "What did you just say?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't hesitate. He doubled down. "You heard me. You'll get nothing from me. Don't expect me to take care of you when you're old. Don't expect me to be there for you when you need help. You've done nothing but hold me back, and I'm sick of it." My hand shook so violently I almost dropped the phone. "Hold you back?" I choked. "I worked myself to the bone to give you everything. Every dollar I had went to you. Every choice I made was for you." He scoffed. "Yeah. Well, maybe I didn't ask you to. You wanted to play the martyr, so don't blame me for it now." The cruelty in his words cut deeper than anything I had ever felt. For years, I had carried the guilt of not being enough, of wondering if I had spoiled him too much, of questioning if my sacrifices had truly mattered. And now, hearing him dismiss it all so casually, so callously, shattered something inside me. I started to cry. Not the quiet kind of tears that you can hide, but the ugly, heaving sobs that come from the deepest parts of your soul. "Matthew," I begged, "I'm your mother. How can you talk to me like this?" But he wasn't moved. His voice only grew colder. "You always make everything about you. I'm done. Don't call me unless you're ready to actually help me instead of whining." And with that, he hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat at the table for what felt like hours, my face buried in my hands, tears soaking through my sleeves. I thought about all the nights I stayed awake worrying about him, all the meals I skipped so he could eat, all the times I defended him when others criticized. And in return, this was what I got: disrespect, dismissal, and a promise that when I needed him most, he would abandon me. When I finally lifted my head, the tea on the table had gone cold. Milo had climbed into my lap, licking my hands as if trying to comfort me. I stroked his fur absent-mindedly, my mind reeling. That was the night something broke inside me. The illusion I had clung to for so long, the hope that Matthew would grow out of his selfishness, that one day he would appreciate me, was gone. I couldn't deny the truth anymore. My son didn't love me the way I loved him. Maybe he never had. I went to bed that night with tears on my pillow. But beneath the grief, there was something else. Something sharper: resolve. Because if Matthew could so easily discard me, then maybe it was time I stopped sacrificing myself for him. And that silence pushed me to make the hardest decision of my life. I had spent a lifetime protecting him, but now I had to protect myself. After that argument, the house felt different. The walls seemed colder, the silence heavier. Even Milo sensed the change. He followed me everywhere, curling up against me at night as though he knew I was breaking inside. For weeks, Matthew and I didn't speak. He didn't call. Didn't check on me. Didn't apologize. At first I told myself he just needed space, that he'd eventually regret his words. But the longer the silence stretched, the clearer it became. He didn't regret anything. And that realization terrified me. Because one day, sooner than I wanted to admit, I would grow older, weaker. Who would I rely on? The son who had looked me in the eye and said, "You'll get nothing from me?" The boy I had raised, who now saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience? No, I couldn't rely on him. Not anymore. That's when my thoughts began to turn toward my will. I had written it years ago, back when I believed Matthew would always be by my side. It was simple. Everything I had, my modest house, my savings, my belongings, would go to him. At the time, it seemed obvious. Who else would I leave it to? But now, the thought of handing him everything I had worked so hard for made me sick to my stomach. Why should a man who treated me like garbage benefit from my life's work? Why should he inherit the very things I had sacrificed my own happiness to build? I pulled the folder out one night and laid it on the kitchen table. My hands trembled as I flipped through the papers. Seeing Matthew's name written there as the sole beneficiary made my chest tighten with anger and grief. I had signed those documents believing it was an act of love. But looking at them now, it felt more like a betrayal of myself. I thought about the people who had been there for me when Matthew wasn't. Lila, my neighbor and closest friend, who had shown up with groceries when I was sick. The ladies from my church group who had invited me into their homes on holidays when Matthew was too busy to visit. Even Milo, who gave me more unconditional love than my own flesh and blood. And then I thought about the charities I'd donated to in small amounts over the years, organizations that helped single mothers, women rebuilding their lives after loss, shelters for families in crisis. People like me, struggling but determined. Wouldn't they deserve my legacy more than Matthew? The more I thought about it, the stronger I felt. I confided in Lila one afternoon over coffee. I told her about the fight, about Matthew's cruel words, about my fears for the future. She listened quietly, her eyes soft with understanding. When I finally admitted I was thinking of changing my will, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Elaine," she said firmly, "you've given that boy everything. If he can't even give you respect, he doesn't deserve a dime. Leave your legacy to people who will honor it." Her words echoed in my mind for days, and with each passing hour, I felt more certain. For so long I had thought being a good mother meant giving Matthew everything I had, even at the cost of myself. But motherhood doesn't erase the fact that I'm also a person. A person who deserves dignity. A person who deserves to be valued. A person who deserves to choose how her story ends. That night, I wrote down a new plan. My house would go to charity, sold to fund programs for single mothers. My savings would be divided among organizations I believed in. My belongings would be given to friends who had stood by me when I needed them. And Matthew would get nothing. Writing it down felt like lifting a boulder off my chest. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. Of course, the decision wasn't without guilt. A voice inside me whispered that I was betraying my son, that I was being petty, that I was turning my back on him. But then I remembered his sneer, his words, the way he had dismissed a lifetime of sacrifice in one breath. This wasn't about revenge. This was about protection. Protecting myself, my dignity, and the value of everything I had worked for. I made an appointment with a notary for the following week. My hands shook as I scheduled it, but my heart felt steady. This was the first step toward freedom. But before I even walked into that office, I knew I had to tell Matthew. He deserved to hear it from me, not through paperwork after I was gone. And more importantly, I needed to see his reaction to confirm, once and for all, that I was making the right decision. I rehearsed the conversation in my head over and over, imagining every possible reaction. Maybe he'd be shocked into self-reflection. Maybe he'd finally realize how far he'd pushed me and apologize. A small part of me, foolish, hopeful, still wished he'd look at me with love again. But deep down, I already knew the truth. But the moment I told Matthew about my plan, all hell broke loose. The day I told him, his mask of civility dropped completely. I rehearsed what I wanted to say 100 times in my head. How do you tell your only child that you've decided to cut him out of your will? How do you explain that his cruelty has consequences? I kept trying to find gentle words, careful phrasing. But deep down, I knew, no matter how I said it, he would explode. Still, I needed to do it. I called him one Saturday morning and asked him to come over. He groaned into the phone, muttering about being busy, but eventually agreed. When he showed up later that afternoon, he strolled in like he owned the place, dropping his keys on the counter and opening my fridge without so much as a hello. That was Matthew in a nutshell: entitled, casual, unthinking. I sat at the kitchen table, my palms sweating. Milo curled at my feet, sensing the tension. Matthew plopped into the chair across from me, scrolling through his phone. "So, what's this about?" he asked without looking up. I swallowed hard. "Matthew, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about my future, about what happens when I'm gone." That got his attention. He glanced up, frowning. "What do you mean?" "I mean my will," I said softly. "I've decided to make some changes." His eyebrows shot up. "Changes? What kind of changes?" I took a deep breath. "I've realized I can't leave everything to you. Not after the way things have been between us. I need to make sure what I've worked for goes somewhere it will be respected, somewhere it will matter." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then his face darkened. "You're joking." I shook my head. "No. I've already spoken to a notary. I'm changing the documents. The house, the savings, it's going to charities and to the people who've supported me when I needed them most." His chair screeched against the floor as he stood up, his voice rising. "You can't do that. I'm your son. It's mine by right." The fury in his tone made me flinch, but I held my ground. Being my son doesn't give you the right to treat me with disrespect and still expect a reward. You told me yourself, "I'll get nothing from you." Well, now you'll get nothing from me. His eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed into slits. He slammed his hand on the table so hard Milo barked and darted under the couch. "You ungrateful woman," he spat. "After everything I've put up with, after everything I've done, this is how you repay me?" My jaw dropped. Ungrateful? I thought of the years I had sacrificed. The meals I skipped, the sleepless nights, the endless loans I took out in my name for his comfort. My voice shook. But not with fear. With anger. "Ungrateful?" I repeated. "Matthew, I gave you my entire life. I sacrificed everything for you. And you've treated me like a wallet, not a mother. I won't do it anymore." His face reddened. "You're insane. You've let those nosy neighbors and your stupid friends get into your head. This isn't you talking. You're being manipulated. This is the mother who's finally realized she deserves respect. And if you can't give me that, then you don't deserve a penny of what I leave behind." For a moment, I thought he might actually strike me. His fists were clenched, his body shaking with rage. Instead, he leaned across the table, his face inches from mine, his voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this. You think you're punishing me? You're only hurting yourself. And when you're old and weak and alone, don't come crawling to me, because I'll laugh in your face." Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I met his gaze and said quietly, "I'd rather be alone than chained to someone who doesn't love me." He let out a bitter laugh, grabbed his keys, and stormed toward the door. "You're dead to me," he shouted as he slammed it shut behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. My whole body shook, and for a long time, I just sat there, staring at the door, listening to the echo of his words. "You're dead to me." Milo crept back out, climbing into my lap. I stroked his fur, my hands trembling, my chest aching, but beneath the grief, something else stirred. Relief. Because in that moment, Matthew had proven me right. He wasn't the boy I once raised. He wasn't the son I had poured my life into. He was a man consumed by greed and entitlement. A man who saw me only as a means to an end. And now, there was no doubt in my mind. I was making the right decision. But his fury only strengthened my resolve. I wasn't alone anymore, I had people who cared about me. After Matthew stormed out, his words still ringing in my ears, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. For days, I walked through my house in a fog, doing chores mechanically, eating meals without tasting them. I had lost my son long before that confrontation, but hearing him declare I was dead to him made the loss undeniable. And yet, even in that darkness, I wasn't entirely alone. Lila showed up the next morning, as if she had a sixth sense for when I was falling apart. She knocked softly, holding a basket of muffins and a thermos of coffee. When I opened the door, she didn't say a word, she just wrapped me in a hug. I broke down right there in her arms, sobbing into her shoulder. "He hates me, Lila. He really hates me." She pulled back, her eyes gentle but firm. "No, Elaine, he doesn't hate you. He hates the fact that you won't let him use you anymore. That's not the same thing." We sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, while I told her everything how Matthew reacted, the things he said, the rage in his voice. She listened quietly, nodding, occasionally squeezing my hand. When I finally finished, she leaned back in her chair. "You know what I think? I think you did the bravest thing you could do. You stood up for yourself. That's not weakness, Elaine, that's strength." Her words planted a seed in me. For so long, I had seen myself as powerless, as a woman chained to her sacrifices. But maybe, just maybe, standing my ground was the first step toward freedom. In the weeks that followed, I leaned on Lila more than ever. We went for walks in the park, cooked dinners together, even took a short weekend trip to the coast just to clear my head. She reminded me that there was still joy to be found, still laughter to be shared, even in the aftermath of heartbreak. I also opened up to others in my circle. At church one Sunday, I confided in a small group of women I trusted. To my surprise, several of them had similar stories, children who had turned entitled, ungrateful, or cruel. One woman, Margaret, told me her son hadn't spoken to her in 3 years, except to demand money. Another, Judith, revealed she had already rewritten her will to exclude her children entirely. "You're not alone in this, Elaine," Judith said softly, placing a hand on mine. "We raise them with love, but we can't control who they become. What we can control is how we protect ourselves." Those words gave me courage. For the first time, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt like part of a quiet army of mothers who had given everything, only to realize they deserved something back. One evening, Lila invited me to dinner with her extended family. Her children, grown and kind, welcomed me as though I belonged. Her granddaughter even climbed into my lap, giggling as she braided my hair with clumsy fingers. The warmth in that room was overwhelming. Driving home that night, I realized something profound. Family isn't just blood. Family is the people who show up, who care, who make you feel seen. And Matthew? He hadn't made me feel seen in years. With the support of my friends, my heart began to heal, little by little. And as it healed, I started thinking less about what I had lost and more about what I could create. One afternoon, while flipping through the mail, I came across a pamphlet from a local charity that supported single mothers. I sat at my kitchen table, reading about their programs, housing assistance, childcare, education. I thought about my younger self, barely surviving after my husband's death, juggling 2 jobs while raising Matthew. What would life have been like if I'd had that kind of help? The thought brought tears to my eyes. I began to picture my estate not as something wasted on an ungrateful son, but as a gift that could change lives. My modest house could be sold to fund scholarships. My savings could provide food for struggling families. My belongings could be donated to people who actually needed them. Suddenly, my legacy didn't feel like a tragedy, it felt like a chance at redemption. Lila encouraged me further. "Elaine, think about it. You've spent your whole life giving to Matthew. Now you can give to people who will actually appreciate it. That's a beautiful legacy." Her words stayed with me. I started making lists of charities I wanted to support. people I trusted to receive personal items, and instructions for how my estate should be handled. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of purpose. The fear that had weighed on me after Matthew's fury began to dissolve. Instead of focusing on his anger, I focused on the good I could do. Instead of grieving over his absence, I celebrated the presence of those who truly cared. By the time I scheduled my appointment with the notary, I wasn't trembling with fear anymore. I was standing tall with conviction. And that thought led me straight to the notary's office. Walking into that office felt like walking into a new life. The morning of my notary appointment, I woke up with a nervous flutter in my stomach. It felt almost like the morning of a wedding, except instead of binding myself to someone else, I was committing myself to freedom. I dressed carefully, choosing a soft blue blouse and black slacks. Nothing fancy, but I wanted to feel dignified. I tied a silk scarf around my neck, one of the few indulgences I had ever bought for myself. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who was older, worn by years of sacrifice, but also a woman who was finally taking control of her destiny. Lila offered to drive me, and I accepted. My hands were trembling too much to hold the wheel. On the way, she chatted lightly about the flowers blooming in her garden, about a recipe she wanted to try that weekend. I knew she was trying to calm me, to remind me of the ordinary world that existed outside the storm in my chest. When we pulled up in front of the small brick office, my breath caught. This was it. Once I signed those papers, there would be no going back. The receptionist led me into a modest room with a mahogany desk and a wall lined with law books. The notary, a kind woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, greeted me warmly. "Elaine, right? Please. Have a seat. I understand you're here to update your will." "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She offered a reassuring smile. "Take your time. Nothing you say is permanent until it's written and signed, but I want you to leave here feeling certain." I nodded, clutching the folder I had prepared. Inside were my notes, my lists, my decisions. I laid them on the desk and unfolded them with trembling fingers. We went through everything carefully. I explained how my house should be sold and the proceeds donated to a local charity for single mothers. My savings were to be divided among 3 organizations, one for education, one for housing assistance, and one for food security. Personal items, like jewelry and keepsakes, would go to Lila and a few close friends who had stood by me when no one else did. "And your son?" the notary asked gently. I swallowed hard. "Nothing." She paused, searching my face. "Are you certain? Many people change their minds at the last minute." Tears welled in my eyes, but my voice was steady. "Yes, I am certain. He made it clear he sees no value in me. I won't leave my life's work in the hands of someone who despises me." The notary nodded, scribbling notes. "Then that's what we'll put down. It's your choice, Elaine. And it's a valid one." Hearing her say that it's your choice made something inside me unlock. For so long I had felt powerless, controlled by Matthew's demands, trapped in a cycle of guilt and obligation. But in that moment, I realized the truth. My life was mine. My choices were mine. And so was my legacy. We reviewed the draft together, line by line. My hand trembled as I signed the final document, but my heart felt stronger than it had in years. "Congratulations," the notary said, sliding the papers into a folder. "It's official. You've taken control of your future." When I stepped out of that office, the sun felt warmer, the air fresher. I stood on the sidewalk, breathing deeply, as though I had been holding my breath for decades and was finally exhaling. Lila squeezed my hand. "How do you feel?" I smiled through tears. "Free." We went out for lunch to celebrate, something simple at a little cafe downtown. I ordered a slice of chocolate cake for dessert, something I rarely did. With every bite, I savored not just the sweetness, but the symbolism. For once, I wasn't denying myself. For once, I wasn't sacrificing for someone else. That evening, back at home, I placed the folder in my desk drawer, locked it, and set the key aside. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the couch with Milo curled beside me, and allowed myself to feel the weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like Matthew had control over me. He could rage, he could sneer, he could tell the world I was the villain, but my truth was written in black ink, signed, stamped, and sealed. It was done. But my relief didn't last long. Because as it turned out, Matthew didn't have to wait until I was gone to discover what I had done. But I had no idea Matthew would find out so quickly. When he discovered the truth, his anger turned dangerous. I thought the new will would stay private, locked away until the day it was needed. I imagined years of peace ahead, knowing my affairs were in order and my conscience was clear. But nothing in my life with Matthew ever went the way I imagined. It was only 2 weeks later when the storm came. I was in the garden, trimming my roses, when I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. Matthew's car. My stomach tightened immediately. He hadn't called, hadn't texted, just showed up, which usually meant trouble. He slammed the car door, stormed up the walkway, and shoved open my front gate so hard it nearly came off the hinge. I froze, pruning shears in hand. As he marched toward me, his face twisted with rage. "You think I wouldn't find out?" He barked, before I could even speak. My heart raced. "Find out what?" I asked cautiously. "Don't play dumb," he snapped. "I know about the will. I know you cut me out. Who told you to do this? Was it that nosy neighbor of yours? Or those church ladies filling your head with poison?" I dropped the shears into the basket, trying to stay calm. "Matthew, no one told me to do anything. It was my decision. Mine alone." His laugh was bitter, mocking. "Your decision? Don't make me laugh. You've always been too weak to make decisions. You let people push you around your whole life. And now, suddenly, you've got a backbone? Please." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stand tall. This wasn't weakness, this was strength. "And yes, I cut you out. Because you made it clear I mean nothing to you. I won't leave my life's work to someone who despises me." His eyes blazed. He took a step closer, his voice low and threatening. "You think this is over? You think you can just erase me like that? I'll contest it. I'll drag you through court if I have to." That money? First time, I felt real fear. Not just fear of losing him as a son, but fear of what he might do. The boy I once cradled in my arms was gone. In his place was a man consumed by greed, willing to destroy me to get what he wanted. My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. "You can try to contest it, Matthew, but you'll fail. Everything is documented, legal, and airtight." "The notary made sure of it," he sneered. "We'll see about that." He spun on his heel, storming back toward his car, but just before he left, he turned, his expression twisted with venom. "You're pathetic, Mom. Everyone's going to see you for what you are, a bitter old woman who turned her back on her own child. You'll die alone, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." The words hit me like stones. I stood frozen in the yard long after he drove away, my chest heaving, tears stinging my eyes. That night I barely slept. Every noise outside made me jump. Every creak of the house made me wonder if he'd come back in the middle of the night to scream at me again, or worse. But more than fear, I felt heartbreak. Not because of what he threatened to do, but because I realized there was no going back. Matthew wasn't just angry, he was vengeful. He wanted to hurt me, to punish me, to make me pay for daring to stand up for myself. The next few days proved my fears right. He called repeatedly, leaving voicemails filled with insults. "You're delusional. You'll regret this. I should have cut you off years ago." Each message cut deeper than the last. Then he started reaching out to relatives, spinning lies. A cousin called me one evening, confused and concerned. "Elaine, Matthew says you're not well. He says people have manipulated you into making rash decisions. Are you okay?" My heart sank. He wasn't just attacking me privately, he was smearing me publicly. I explained the truth, but I could hear the hesitation in my cousin's voice. Matthew was young, charming, persuasive. I was older, fragile, easy to dismiss. Soon, I started hearing whispers through the grapevine that I was losing it, that I had been taken advantage of. That poor Matthew was the victim of a cruel, paranoid mother. It felt like death by 1,000 cuts. Every rumor, every doubt cast on me, chipped away at the dignity I had fought so hard to reclaim. But I refused to crumble. I sat down one evening with Lila and showed her the voicemails, the messages, the stories I'd heard from relatives. She listened carefully, her face growing stormy. "Elaine," she said firmly, "this is his revenge. He can't control you anymore, so he's trying to destroy your reputation. Don't let him. You've come too far to let him drag you back down." Her words lit a fire in me. Matthew could rage, he could smear, he could threaten, but he couldn't undo what I had done. My will was sealed. My choice was made. And no amount of anger could change that. Still, a part of me knew this battle wasn't over. Matthew had already shown me he was willing to go further than I ever imagined. What would he do next? How far would he go to try and break me? But his next move would shock me to my core. If he couldn't break me directly, he tried to ruin me publicly. After Matthew stormed out of my yard that day, I thought his fury had reached its peak. I thought the threats, the voicemails, the cold venom in his eyes were as far as he'd go. I was wrong. Because when he realized he couldn't bully me into changing my will, he found another weapon. My reputation. It started small. A phone call from my cousin. A concerned text from an old friend. "Elaine, are you okay? Matthew says you're not yourself lately. He says you've been confused, that people are taking advantage of you." The first time I heard it, I nearly dropped the phone. Confused? Me? I had never been sharper in my life, but I could see the plan immediately. If he could convince others I wasn't in my right mind, then maybe he could challenge the will later. I tried to laugh it off, but the calls kept coming. My sister-in-law left a voicemail saying, "Elaine, maybe you should see a doctor. Matthew is really worried about you." Worried. The word made my stomach churn. The same son who told me to my face I'd get nothing from him was now pretending to be the concerned child, spreading stories to make himself look like the victim. Soon, the whispers spread beyond family. At church one Sunday, I noticed people glancing at me differently, pity in their eyes. One woman pulled me aside and whispered, "Elaine, I heard you're not well. Don't worry, we'll pray for you." I went home that day and cried. Not because of the gossip itself, but because I realized Matthew wasn't just angry at me, he was determined to erase me. The worst part was, his lies worked on some people. A few relatives began siding with him, telling me I was being unfair, that I was abandoning my dutiful son. They urged me to reconsider, to change the will before it was too late. Every time I wanted to scream, "Where were you when he ignored me for years? Where were you when he told me I was nothing?" But I held my tongue, because I knew anger would only feed his narrative. Lila, of course, saw right through it. One afternoon, I showed her a stack of messages I'd received sympathy from some, accusations from others. She read them all, then set them down firmly. "He's running a smear campaign, Elaine," she said, her voice steady. "Classic manipulation. He couldn't control you directly, so now he's trying to turn everyone else against you. But listen to me, you can't let this break you. You've already won the most important battle. You stood up for yourself." Her words steadied me. Still, the days that followed were heavy. Matthew posted on social media about me thinly veiled but clear enough that everyone knew who he meant. He wrote about elderly parents being manipulated by outsiders, about families being torn apart by lies. People commented with sympathy, praising him for being such a devoted son. I wanted to reply, to tell the world the truth, but Lila stopped me. "Don't fight him in public," she warned. "You'll never win that way. Live your life. The truth will reveal itself eventually." So I stayed quiet, even as my name was dragged through the mud. I focused on small joys instead: painting, gardening, dinners with Lila. I reminded myself daily, I am not crazy. I am not confused. I know exactly what I'm doing. But Matthew wasn't finished. One evening, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found two distant relatives on the porch, faces tight with concern. "Elaine," one of them said gently. "We've heard things. We think maybe you should let Matthew help you manage your finances, just in case. It might be safer." I nearly laughed in their faces. Safer? Handing control over to the very man trying to destroy me? I shook my head. "No, thank you. My affairs are already in order, and I am perfectly capable of managing them myself." They exchanged a glance, clearly unconvinced. When they left, I sank into a chair, shaking with anger. It was one thing for Matthew to spread lies. It was another for people to show up at my door, ready to hand my life back into his hands. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I will not bend. I will not let him rewrite my story. He took my sonhood away from me, but he will not take my dignity." The smear campaign raged on, but something inside me shifted. Instead of despair, I began to feel a strange strength. Because every cruel word, every rumor, every attempt to tear me down proved exactly why I had been right to cut him out. He wasn't fighting for love, he was fighting for money. The realization gave me peace. Still, one unexpected thing happened during that storm of lies, something that caught me off guard and gave me hope. Because in the middle of all the noise, I received a letter that changed everything. And then, something unexpected happened that changed everything. In the middle of the chaos, a letter arrived that gave me hope. By the time Matthew's smear campaign was in full swing, I felt like I was living in a fog. Every day brought another call, another whisper, another sideways glance at church. Even people I had known for years began treating me with cautious pity, as though I were fragile glass about to shatter. I had learned to hold my head high, but inside, it was exhausting. I was tired of defending myself, tired of explaining, tired of pretending his betrayal didn't hurt. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe everyone else was right. Was I being too harsh? Too unforgiving? Should I have given him another chance? That doubt gnawed at me like a parasite, feeding on my loneliness. And then, one morning, as I sifted through the mail, I found a plain white envelope addressed in a familiar but shaky hand. The return address was from my cousin, Evelyn, a woman I hadn't spoken to in years. Curious, I opened it at the kitchen table, expecting perhaps a polite inquiry about the rumors. Instead, what I read stopped me cold. "Dear Elaine, I don't know if you'll be surprised to hear from me, but I felt compelled to write after hearing some of the things Matthew has been saying. I want you to know that I don't believe a word of it. In fact, your story reminded me so much of my own that I felt I had to reach out. When my son, Daniel, turned 30, he became someone I no longer recognized. He stopped visiting unless he needed money. He lied, manipulated, and when I finally said no, he told the whole family I was losing my mind. They believed him for a while. I felt so alone, so betrayed. But eventually, I realized something important. I wasn't crazy. I was strong. You are strong, too, Elaine. Don't let him convince you otherwise. You did the right thing." I sat there, reading and rereading Evelyn's words, tears dripping onto the page. I hadn't even known she went through something similar. Our family had always been private, hiding the ugly truths behind smiles at reunions. But here she was, admitting she had walked the same painful road and survived. It felt like someone had taken my hand across the distance and whispered, "You're not alone." The letter went on to describe how Evelyn had eventually cut ties completely with Daniel, leaving her estate to charities and close friends instead. She admitted it had been painful, but she said she had never once regretted it. "When I'm gone," she wrote, "I want to know my life helped someone who deserved it, not someone who only saw me as a bank account. You have every right to make the same choice." By the time I finished, my tears had turned into something else, not grief, but relief. For so long I had felt like the villain in Matthew's story. But Evelyn's letter reminded me that I wasn't the villain at all. I was a woman who had given everything, and now, finally, was giving something back to herself. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered, "Thank you." That evening I called Evelyn. We talked for hours, our voices trembling with emotion as we shared our stories. She told me about the guilt she carried, the way people judged her, the loneliness she felt. But she also told me about the freedom she found afterward, the peace, the joy, the sense of dignity. Her words were like a balm to my soul. I realized then that what Matthew was doing, his smear campaign, his threats, his lies, wasn't unique. It was the tactic of someone desperate to maintain control. And I wasn't the only mother who had faced it. For the first time in months, I felt seen. I pinned Evelyn's letter to the corkboard above my desk, where I could see it every day. Whenever doubt crept back in, I read it again. Whenever Matthew's lies weighed heavily on me, I traced the handwriting with my finger and reminded myself, I am not crazy, I am not weak, I am not alone. Slowly, that letter became my shield. It gave me the courage to face the whispers, to ignore the rumors, to keep living my life without bending to Matthew's will. And in that newfound strength, I made another decision. I wanted closure, not just through legal documents, not just through quiet resolve, but face to face. I needed to look Matthew in the eye one last time, to say my piece, to draw the final line in the sand. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew he would rage, lie, maybe even threaten me again. But Evelyn's words echoed in my mind. You are strong. You did the right thing, and I was ready to prove it. But Matthew wasn't finished trying to break me. I realized I needed to look my son in the eye one last time. After weeks of whispers, rumors, and sleepless nights, I came to a decision. I couldn't let things end with unanswered words and slammed doors. I needed to see Matthew one last time, not to reconcile but to stand in my truth. To tell him directly, without anger or pleading, that his power over me was gone. I chose a public place, a quiet cafe downtown. Somewhere neutral, where his temper couldn't escalate without witnesses. Lila insisted on driving me and waiting nearby. I'll be right outside, she said firmly. In case you need me. Her presence gave me courage. When I walked into the cafe, Matthew was already there. He sat in the corner, tapping impatiently on his phone, his jaw clenched. He barely looked up when I approached. I slid into the seat across from him, my heart pounding. For a moment, we sat in silence, the air between us heavy. Finally, I spoke. Matthew, thank you for coming. I wanted us to talk face to face, one last time. He leaned back, crossing his arms. So, are you ready to come to your senses? Ready to fix that will? His arrogance hit me like a wave. But I steadied myself. No, Matthew. I didn't ask you here to bargain. I asked you here to tell you, clearly and calmly, why I made my decision. His eyes narrowed. This should be good. I folded my hands on the table. I gave you everything. My youth, my health, my money, my love. I sacrificed dreams I'll never get back so you could have a better life. But instead of gratitude, you gave me contempt. You dismissed me, disrespected me, and finally, you looked me in the eye and said I'd get nothing from you. Those words broke something inside me. And I will not leave my life's work to someone who treats me like I don't matter. His face reddened, but I kept going. You've tried to bully me. You've spread lies about me. You've told people I'm confused, that I've been manipulated. But I know the truth. I am not confused. I am not weak. And I am not your victim anymore. For the first time, his smirk faltered. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, but then, like always, he covered it with anger. You're unbelievable, he spat. After everything I've put up with from you, you're going to play the saint now? You're going to act like I'm the villain? I looked him straight in the eye. You made yourself the villain, Matthew. I begged for your love and respect. You gave me scorn. I asked for honesty. You gave me lies. I gave you my life, and you threw it back in my face. That was your choice. This is mine. He slammed his hand on the table, startling a couple at the next booth. You'll regret this. You think you're so righteous? You'll die alone, Mom. Alone and bitter. My throat tightened, but I refused to let tears fall. Instead, I leaned forward, my voice quiet but firm. Better to die alone than to live chained to someone who despises me. I would rather leave this world with dignity than hand it over to greed. He stared at me, his jaw working, his fists clenching. I saw the boy he once was for just a split second, the little boy who used to cling to me, who used to whisper, "Don't leave me, Mom." But that boy was long gone. Finally, he stood abruptly, grabbing his coat. Fine, have it your way. You're dead to me. I nodded slowly. Then we understand each other. He stormed out of the cafe, leaving the door swinging in his wake. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty chair across from me. My hands shook, my chest ached, but beneath the pain was something stronger. Relief. It was over. When I walked outside, Lila was waiting. She saw my face and didn't ask questions, she just hugged me tightly. It's done, isn't it? I nodded into her shoulder. It's done. As we drove home, I gazed out the window at the passing streets, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. They weren't tears of regret, they were tears of release. For years, I had begged Matthew to see me, to love me, to treat me as more than a wallet, but now I understood something vital. I didn't need his validation. I didn't need his love. Not if it came at the cost of my dignity. That final confrontation didn't heal the wound between us. It didn't bring back the son I had once known. But it gave me closure. It gave me the strength to finally let go. That day marked the true end of our relationship. Once I let go of him, I finally saw the bigger picture. The day after that final confrontation with Matthew, I woke up to a quiet house. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy, it felt liberating. No more waiting for his calls, no more rehearsing conversations in my head. No more begging to be seen. It was over. And in that freedom, I realized something important. I still had a life to live. And I still had a legacy to build. I sat down at my kitchen table with a notebook and pen, the morning sun streaming through the curtains. I wrote at the top of the page, "What do I want to leave behind?" For so long I had answered that question automatically. Everything goes to Matthew. But now, the possibilities stretched wide open. I began listing names of charities that had touched my heart. A shelter for single mothers downtown, where I once volunteered when Matthew was little. A scholarship fund for underprivileged kids at the local high school. A food bank that had helped me once when times were impossibly tight. The more I wrote, the more excited I felt. This wasn't just about denying Matthew, this was about creating something beautiful. I could take the years of sacrifice, the pain, the heartbreak, and turn it into hope for someone else. That afternoon, I called the shelter for single mothers and scheduled a visit. When I arrived, I was greeted by a young woman named Tasha, holding a baby no older than 6 months. She told me her story, how she had fled an abusive relationship, how the shelter had given her a safe place to start over. As I held her baby for a moment, I felt tears well up in my eyes. That could have been me, years ago. That was me, in a way, when I lost my husband and was left to fend for myself. I had survived by sheer grit, but not everyone has the strength or resources to make it. When I left the shelter, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time since Matthew's betrayal, I felt purpose. I started small. I donated a few boxes of clothes, some furniture I no longer needed. Then I offered to volunteer once a week, helping with childcare while the mothers attended job training. Soon I became part of their little community, surrounded by women who knew struggle, who knew sacrifice, who knew resilience. They looked at me with gratitude, not expectation. And that difference was everything. Lila noticed the change in me. One evening, as we sipped tea on her porch, she smiled and said, "You look 10 years younger, Elaine. It's like you've found yourself again." And she was right. For years, my identity had been tied to being Matthew's mother. Now, I was more than that. I was Elaine. A woman with something valuable to give. A woman who could leave behind more than bitterness. I also began to reconnect with my art. I had loved painting when I was younger, but motherhood and survival had pushed it aside. Now, I set up a small corner in the living room with canvases and brushes. At first, my hands felt clumsy, but soon the colors began to flow. Reds, blues, yellows, each stroke a declaration that I was still here, still creating, still alive. A local community center invited me to showcase my paintings in a small exhibition. I hesitated at first, but Lila nudged me. "Elaine, people should see what you've made. This is part of your legacy too." Standing in that little gallery, surrounded by my work, hearing strangers admire the colors and emotion, I felt a pride I hadn't known in decades. For once, my worth wasn't measured by what I gave to Matthew. It was measured by what I created for myself. My will, once a symbol of duty and inevitability, had transformed into something powerful. It was no longer about leaving money to a son who didn't value me. It was about leaving behind hope, opportunity, and beauty. Every time I updated the documents with my notary, I felt more certain. The house would go to the shelter. The savings would be split among the scholarship fund, the food bank, and a small endowment for the community center. My jewelry and keepsakes would go to Lila and to a few of the women at church who had become like sisters to me. Matthew's name no longer appeared anywhere, and that absence no longer stung, it empowered me. Of course, there were still moments of sadness. Late at night, I sometimes thought about what could have been. I pictured an alternate world where Matthew had chosen love over greed, where he might have sat beside me at the gallery, proud of his mother. But those thoughts no longer consumed me. They passed like shadows, fleeting and powerless. Because the truth was, I had built something stronger than his absence. I had built a legacy that was mine. One evening, after finishing a painting, I sat on the couch with Milo curled beside me. I looked around my little home at the canvases leaning against the walls, at the stack of donation receipts on my desk, at the letter from my cousin Evelyn pinned to my corkboard. And I realized, I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I had turned heartbreak into purpose, betrayal into freedom, loss into legacy. And in that transformation, I had found myself again. And as I built my new legacy, I discovered something even more valuable. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. When I look back now, it feels almost surreal how far I've come, how much I've lost, and how much I've gained in the process. For decades, I defined myself by my role as Matthew's mother. Every choice I made, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, it was all for him. I thought that was what love was supposed to be, giving until there was nothing left. But now I know better. Love without respect is not love, and sacrifice without gratitude is not noble, it's exploitation. Matthew made his choice the day he looked me in the eye and sneered, "You'll get nothing from me." And I made mine the day I sat in that notary's office and signed my name to a new future. I won't pretend it was easy. There are still moments when my heart aches. On holidays, when I see families together, laughter spilling out of homes, I sometimes wonder what it would be like if things had been different. If my son had chosen kindness instead of cruelty. If we could have shared a meal, a hug, a life. But then I remind myself, I didn't lose a son. I lost an illusion. The truth is, Matthew had been gone for a long time. The boy who once clung to my hand on his first day of school, who whispered, "I love you, Mom," when he thought I was asleep, that boy faded years ago. In his place grew a man who saw me not as a mother, but as a resource. A man who measured my worth in dollars, not devotion. Letting go of him wasn't the tragedy I once thought it was survival. And in surviving, I found something unexpected: joy. I fill my days now with things that matter to me. I volunteer at the shelter, where I rock babies to sleep and remind young mothers that they are stronger than they know. I paint, splashing color across canvases, creating beauty in a world that once felt gray. I host small dinners with Lila and my church friends, where laughter fills my home in a way it never did when Matthew was here. And perhaps most importantly, I've built a legacy that reflects who I am, not who others demanded I be. My will is not a symbol of bitterness, as Matthew would claim. It's a symbol of freedom. A declaration that my life, my sacrifices, my hard work will not be wasted on someone who never valued them. Instead, they will fuel scholarships, meals, shelters, and dreams. That thought brings me peace every single day. On my last birthday, Lila surprised me with a cake, candles glowing brightly. As I leaned over to blow them out, I paused for a moment. In the past, I would have wished for Matthew's love, for reconciliation, for some impossible fantasy where everything was healed. But this time, I didn't. I closed my eyes and made a different wish. May I continue to live freely, on my terms, surrounded by love that is real. When I opened my eyes, everyone around the table was smiling friends who had become family. People who showed up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And for the first time in my life, I felt celebrated simply for being me. I don't know what the future holds, none of us do. But I do know this: I will face it with dignity, I will face it with strength, and I will face it without regret. If Matthew ever decides to change, if he ever finds humility and comes knocking on my door with true remorse in his eyes, perhaps I'll listen. But I will never go back to the woman who begged for scraps of affection, who lived in fear of being unloved. That version of me is gone. Now, I live as Elaine. A woman who fought her way through loss, through betrayal, through heartbreak, and came out freer than she ever imagined. And if I could leave one message for anyone listening to my story, it would be this: your worth is not defined by who walks away. Your legacy is not bound to those who cannot see your value. You have the right to choose your own path, to protect your heart, to decide how your story ends. Because in the end, that's what I learned. My life is mine. My choice is mine. My legacy is mine. And that is the greatest gift I could ever give myself. Because in the end, the greatest inheritance I gave myself was freedom.